Hello, everybody. Hello, and welcome to Side Hustle Ideas. Once again, after our hiatus for a couple of weeks there for summer break, yes, today is the big return, and the title of today's episode is "Should You Get an MBA in 2025? What No One Tells You." So we're going to be talking about that. Yes, this is episode 100. Can you believe it? Episode 100. We've done 100 of these. No, I was just marveling at, not whenever, but a lot of times when I'm about to go live, you do the thing where you kind of clear your throat, you just go like that. And then it turns into like a coughing fit. It never happens except for when you're like about to go on in some way, shape, or form. So of course that's what happened to me a moment ago. So then when you do go live, your eyes are all watering and all this kind of stuff. Beautiful. It's Monday. We're here. Let's get into it. I see that Molly is here, and Sagar is here. Sagar says hi. Hi, Sagar. How you doing? Thanks for being here. A shout out goes always. God, I'm still flustered from the coughing fit. A shout out, as always, goes out to my YouTube channel members. You guys are awesome. Membership has its privileges. To my Patreons, to my super thanks donors, and of course you, my participants, thank you for being here. You guys are awesome. This is a live chat, so if you are a subscriber to my channel and you're seeing my beautiful face, you should see a chat box somewhere near my face, depending on what device you're watching this on, and you should be able to get in there and comment, ask questions if you're wondering about something. As I said earlier, we're going to be talking about getting an MBA in 2025. Right now, if this is something that you're considering or you're thinking about, we're going to sort of talk about both sides of this and get into it. And as always, on this live stream, I present a live challenge to everyone here. If you are watching this and you can get in the chat, put in the chat a side hustle idea, something to do on the side that you think is a good idea, and we can always kick that around. My screen looks a bit weird. I'm just going to try and resize this a little bit. There we go, so I can read the comments fully. There we go. Okay, because Sagar just said something. Sagar says, "It's nice to see consistent of you and also mine." Okay, well, that's almost a sentence, but I appreciate the sentiment. Thank you, Sagar. That's very nice of you to say so. And thank you for being here. Okay, let's get into this. So, I often don't know whether I should do like a basic episode where we talk about what an MBA is for people that have like no clue, or we should talk about a more sophisticated thing. Let's start with the basics, and if you guys have any preferences, let me know. So for those of you who don't know, an MBA stands for Masters of Business Administration. It's essentially the gold standard for if you want to learn business, okay? Business, of course, being the scientific study of how to make money. That's essentially what it is, okay? So, and Andrew is here. Andrew says, hi from the UK. Right on. Where in the UK, Andrew? I was just there last fall in the UK. Anyway, yeah, it's a scientific study of how to make money, and that's what business administration is. And this is a master's degree. So you can get a bachelor degree in business. You can then go on to get an MBA, the sort of gold standard for someone who knows business. And then you can go on to get a PhD in business, right? The PhD level, that's where you make discoveries. That's where you push the boundaries of human knowledge outwards and learn things that no one has learned before, discovered things that no one has discovered before. That's the PhD level, right? The master's level that we're talking about, that's where you stop just shy of that. You master the topic, but you're not actually going out and making discoveries and, pushing our knowledge of business forward, right? You're just simply, versed in business. What do you learn in an MBA program? This is something you take at university, and you can take it. You can take it in the traditional way, like the brick and mortar way, where you physically go to the university every day and attend classes and lectures and see professors face to face and stuff like this. You can talk to the other students face to face. You're in the same room. You could do that the traditional way, let's call it the brick and mortar way, or you could do the online version of it, right? The online version where you essentially take the classes remotely. Everything from like seeing a video of the class where it's like a live stream, like what I'm doing, all the way to, the opposite of that, where it's not in real time. You simply go away, read the books, do the assignments, send them in electronically, like over email or, over a website or something. And, you can have an interactive experience to a degree where you chat with other students online and things like this. Or you could just not do any of that. There's a continuum from like totally insular and cut off from the world on one hand, and as immersive as you possibly can get online with a teacher and other students, right? They also have, I believe there's also options if you want to get those massive, what do you call it? Like not massive multiplayer games, but the mass student courses where you have like 10,000 students in the same class kind of thing. There's also options for that stuff too, right? So you've got different options if you want to learn this material, right? And like we're talking about all of that. So if you want to get an MBA, there's options for all of it. Now, just to give everyone an idea, my understanding is that if you wanted to get a brick and mortar MBA, where you want to go to a university and take all your classes in person, it can range from anywhere between $50,000 US to something like $250,000 US. That's my understanding for the range in the United States. Now, I'm not in the United States, I'm in Canada, but wherever you're watching this from, like, for example, our good friend Andri, who's in the UK, you're going to have local options for this kind of stuff, right? Now, even the online options are quite pricey. That's what kind of surprised me. I was just looking this up, a few minutes before I went live, and just to see where we are right now with like prices and things. And online MBAs that are accredited can get really pricey. Like anything up to $100,000, you can get programs. So, for example, Harvard Business School in the US, which is one of the sort of gold standards of getting an MBA, they have an online option, but it's still running you like $100,000 US, to take their like online option, right? So you have stuff all the way on the low end for maybe a couple $1,000s, accredited, all the way up to $100,000 if we're talking online, right? And then, of course, I'll just say this because, it does affect some people, is if you're going to get like a brick and mortar MBA, you're going to go to a university, you're not just paying the tuition, right? You're paying for other expenses like living there or living, while you're in school, right? So you're having to pay for your food and your board and all that kind of stuff while you're at school. So if you factor all that in, which you probably should if you're doing that kind of thing, then it gets even pricier. So my point is that you can do it from a couple of $1,000s online in some less prestigious programs, but yet accredited, all the way up to like over $250,000 if you're going to go right to the top. So that's what we're talking about. To hopefully frame this. Let me know what you guys think of that in the live chat, if you can get in there. I'm just curious. And there are 10 people here. Thank you for being here. So what do you learn in an MBA? This is the thing. We already explained how we, as in the royal we already explained, we already explained what business is. It's a scientific study of how to make money. We already explained that the MBA is a sort of gold standard for knowing business. The idea is if you have one, you should know business really well. You should be a master. What do you actually learn in an MBA? An MBA is traditionally a 2-year program. So you would take 2 years of university full-time, and that amounts to something like 12 courses usually, give or take, right? And the idea is that you would have several key courses that are the core things you need to know. And then on top of that, several other courses would be electives. They'd be optional things depending on which area of business you're interested in, right? So some people might be interested more on, the marketing sales side. Other people might be more interested in the sort of accounting or finance side. Other people might be more interested in like operations, quality, efficiency, that kind of side, right? There's different areas you can get into. For example, you can major in entrepreneurship, right? Which is a sort of subset of business. That's where you're the type of person that is looking for business opportunities, and then you start something up. You start a small company that then sort of meets a very specific need that you identify, right? Right. So that's a very specific thing. There are many different areas of business, and the basic idea is that, I can't remember how many of them there are. There's maybe about 8, I would say. Things that you have all heard of, everybody's all heard of. Things like sales and marketing, right? That's a major one. Operations, right? Like how to run an operation. Accounting, right? That's a foundation. Finance, that's another foundation. If you're wondering about the difference between accounting and finance, accounting is essentially money in the past, right? What's been going on? Where did the money go, right? Did we pay our bills on time? How much money is floating around out there? We've received money. Does that count as our profit, or is that to be kept aside to cover expenses, right? That's accounting. Finance is different. Finance is money in the future, right? So it's questions like, how can we make money? If we do this now, will that make us more money? Or should we do this other thing? Will that make us more money? What's the likelihood of this option turning out as we expect versus that option, right? So investing and the treasury function, how can we raise money? This is all finance because it's money in the future, right? So those are 2 separate areas. And you see some people kind of majoring in those areas, right? On top of that, you have like HR, another big area of business, right? And HR is not simply hiring. HR is anything to do with employees, like anything. Everything from recruitment and selection, like we said, like that I normally talk about on this channel, all the way to things like how employees behave in different situations, right? How they interact with each other. Things like culture, their attitudes, their expectations, right? If you have a problem with morale, right? What's that caused by? And then what I found fascinating about HR and that kind of stuff is that it can get into really sort of high-level concepts to do with human behavior, which I find quite interesting, which is like, we all know this kind of trick, right? How can someone be in charge and exert influence, but not get blamed if something goes wrong, right? Every CEO, every general manager wants this. How can we maintain control over everything, but yet we're not seen to be in control? We don't get blamed when something goes wrong. We can deny responsibility, if we need to. How can one do this, right? So it's almost like playing with people, right? Essentially, you get something like organizational behavior, which is a course you can take. It's like essentially the study of power. If you ever wondered about power politics and things like this, it explains a lot of how people behave, right? A little bit of psychology, a little bit of sociology. So you're learning that kind of stuff too, right? That's a part of it. Operations, right? The traditional thing is if you run a manufacturing plant, right? How can you set things up so it's efficient, right? Or it makes sense, or it's flexible. Okay, so like efficiency, right? And then you get areas like sub areas like quality, right? If you're going to do something, how can you do it well? If you're designing a product, how can you do that? And then you get other areas that are, unfortunately, they're not like mainstream, but they're still pretty important, like innovation. I took a degree in engineering when I was very young, and what's interesting is that I took an MBA later on, and it's only in the MBA that I learned about innovative thinking. You would think an engineer would learn that, but no, like the way to actually come up with something innovative to solve a problem, I had to take an MBA to learn that. It was quite interesting. So there's all these different areas, and the idea is that you take at least one course in all of them. And the idea is that you can't actually understand business if you only understand one area. If you just know accounting, for example, you don't really understand business because you're not getting the full picture. Or you just understand sales and marketing, like the marketing lens. You understand that. You understand how to sell something and what's of value to people. That's great. That's very important that you know that. But if you just take that and you don't know things like accounting or other areas, then once again, you've got a skewed view of business. You don't understand business because you're only seeing it through that one perspective. You need to have several perspectives of looking at things for you to understand business. That's the idea. So that's the theory behind like an MBA. You would take several courses, one in each of these areas, and then you can either keep taking more general courses or you could go deeper into one particular area and specialize in that area. I'm not sure if you guys can picture it, but for example, entrepreneurship is another area like we talked about. That's another essential perspective to look at business, right? If you don't understand anything about entrepreneurship or that mentality, you don't understand business. You can't look at a situation and say, I understand what's going on here. You can't, because you're missing a key way of looking at it, right? Same with economics. Economics is also a big area of business, right? And what they do in business is that they teach you a sort of version of applied economics, right? So you can get a degree in economics, and that's where they do, first of all, they go a lot more in depth, but then they give you like more of the theory and stuff. In business, they teach economics also, but they give you a more applied sort of version of it. So here's how you can use it to actually solve real world problems or answer specific questions. So that's the idea. That's what it is. Now, oh, by the way, and if you have any questions as we go through this, let me know in the chat. That's what the chat is for. It's a live chat. And when I don't get anything for a while, I always fear that I'm putting everyone to sleep. So if you get in there and say something, that helps me feel like I'm actually doing something right. I'm just turning up the brightness on my cameras because I'm using a very, very basic level of technology here that I'm not too ashamed to admit. Okay, so some reasons why you would not want to get an MBA. If you're just trying to figure out what you want to do, getting an MBA is a pretty expensive way of figuring that out. I would not recommend it. And yes, you can probably see in the corner of the screen here. Yes, I have. Or actually right here. I actually have a course. It's technically a course, but really it's a program, where you learn this stuff with me for $100. $100. Not $100,000, $100. Because basically you get the reading list. You get here's all the books. You can order them from Amazon for very cheap. We're talking like $5, $10 kind of thing. And then I provide a lot of videos that guide you through it, and you read all the material. So if you're just looking for an overview, I did that. I did that because I believe that this stuff should be more widespread. People should learn this information. It will benefit you in your life. Like, understanding how to make money is a good thing. It helps you manage your own money. It helps you not fall victim to scams and things, because you understand how money works. Things like this. It helps you in life. Like if you're trying to make career decisions based on what career path would be better for me to take, if I prioritize making money, as a big part of that decision. And so on. I mean, it comes up again and again, right? If you want to make financial decisions, it helps to know business, things like that. So I believe this knowledge should be more widespread. And I have to go into my rant now. I find it criminal that a lot of schools, it's almost like they're behaving like gatekeepers. A lot of the knowledge that they teach, a lot of the theory that you learn has been in the public domain for a very long time. Nobody owns it. It's like teaching somebody grade 12 mathematics, high school mathematics. Nobody owns that information. You can go buy a book on it from the local bookstore, read it, maybe do some practice problems, and then math, Business is the same thing. The only challenge is what books to buy. You know what I mean? There's some good ones out there, and then there's some not so great ones, right? So I feel very strongly that people should know this. It really empowers you in your career. And even the idea of entrepreneurship, what we talk about on this live stream, Side Hustle Ideas, is essentially like encouraging an entrepreneurial spirit in people. You see a business opportunity, you see something you can maybe provide, some kind of value you can provide. Let's see if we can make some money with that. You sell something, right? And you do it yourself. You do it on the side. You might have a day job, that's fine. But you do this, maybe on the weekends or maybe a little bit in the evenings or, whatever. And you have a second income stream, right? That's what we normally talk about on this live stream. And understanding business is like the knowledge to be able to know how to do this, to be able to recognize the opportunities, and then to understand what to do about it. What should you do? How does everything work? What decisions should you make? Should I do this or this? Should I do it this way or that way? That's pretty useful knowledge, at least to my way of thinking. So I like to encourage people with this. So that's why I put that course. That's why I'm talking about this topic right now. I think everyone should know this. And it's silly, in my opinion, to charge people like hundreds of thousands of dollars to just to teach this. It's in the public domain, I don't care if you have Albert Einstein himself teaching you. It's still the same knowledge that you could get from a book. You know what I mean? It's like teaching somebody high school math. You could get the most accomplished professor of math in the entire world, but they're still teaching you basic math, Do you need to spend $100,000 to learn the times tables properly? It's like, I don't think so, So anyway, so that's an option for some people if you want to check that out. If you're serious about this, to me, it's like a no-brainer because you're seeing an entire preview of what any full-blown, brick and mortar program would be. Okay, now there's other aspects of this too. Okay, let's see here. Stuff I don't normally talk about. Okay. The value of an MBA, what an MBA really gives you. You get other things too. At least that's the promise, is you get other things. Things like a network. There's networking opportunities, right? Why would you take an MBA from Harvard Business School? Why would you do that? Or those Ivy League schools in the United States? Why would you do that? Well, you get the intrinsic knowledge. Great. Cost you, an arm and a leg to get it. But what do you also get? Well, you get a network, right? That's the idea. That's the promise, is that you're going to be rubbing shoulders with, or elbows, as the case may be. You're going to be rubbing elbows and shoulders with people at school, other students in your class. Okay, these people, I don't know, they might have, they might come from a family that owns a lot of businesses or something. I don't know. You have access to the professors, to the teachers, and a lot of them have connections out in, the real world. They'll have stuff in the private sector or, other connections. And, presumably that can help you. That can either get you a job or other things. You can get the attention of people who can give you a job. And then, of course, it's up to you. So a lot of schools like to make that promise. And I think that, I think that there's something in it for some people. It's not as much as they claim there is, but I think that's definitely a factor. There's other things too. There's something that they also refer to as, I believe, employment support. I'm not sure if that's the right term. But that's the idea where you go there and it's not simply the networking opportunities that they're offering you. They're saying listen, we have other perks of taking our program. For example, internships, right? If you take a MBA from Harvard, there's an opportunity for internships. This is more formal type employment arrangements that are kind of linked to a network where we say, okay, we'll place you inside different companies. for a term. So you can go and intern in like some big American investment bank or something. You know what I mean? And that gets your foot in the door. The idea is that, like, okay, if you then graduate and you're looking for a job, you already have worked for whatever company it was. If they're going to hire somebody, they'd rather hire you than a total stranger. They've already worked with you. They've already vetted you. And you already know several of the people inside the organization. Presumably they are singing you praises and recommending you. So you get that opportunity, right? That comes part and parcel of it. Is all that stuff guaranteed? No, it isn't. They may offer it, but you may not get an internship, or if you do get an internship, it may not turn into a permanent employment opportunity. But the option is there. The chance is there, right? So that's part of the sticker price for a lot of these things, If you're looking at stuff on the high end, they have that. And there is some value in that. However, you have to be the type of person that understands how to take advantage of those. If you're, a glorious introvert that doesn't understand the value of networking or even how to do it, you may not avail yourselves of these opportunities if you were there, right? Even though it's technically something that's available, you may not reap the benefits of it because you're not sort of engaging with it, right? But it's an option, right? So that's definitely a part of it. Now, the thing is, the way you look at this stuff is that there's a cost associated. So the idea is that let's pretend that your MBA costs you, I don't know, $50,000. The idea is that are you going to be making, over the course of your career, a total of more than $50,000 having had by virtue of having had the MBA? That's the big question, right? You don't take it for fun. You take it to experience a payoff, right? So if it costs you $50,000, but it enables you to make $30,000 more every year for the next 25 years or something, then okay, it makes sense, right? Financially. If it gives a nice fancy sort of suffix to your name, but yet doesn't enable you to get a better job or a more higher paying job than what you already would have gotten, then it doesn't pay off, does it? So you have to look at like the two scenarios. If you don't get an MBA, here's what you're expecting to make. If you do get an MBA, you have this added cost, but then here's what you're expecting to make over the next X many years, right? And you have to come out on top. Right? It has to be superior, where you make more money in the end, despite the initial cost. Right? I think the reality that nobody tells you, because I did say the stuff that nobody tells you, is that grades don't really matter that much. As long as you pass, as long as you get it, right? That's kind of stupid, but that's the way it works, right? You have the MBA. Enough said. Nobody asks any more questions. They go, yeah, but what were your grades? Right? After that, you look at who the person is, you look at what they're like to work with, and you look at their track record. That's what really matters beyond that. So grades don't really enter into it. There's no substitute for being able, like, I hate this term, but it's true, for being able to hustle, being able to understand networking and understand how to seize opportunities and how to seek out opportunities. You have this thing to your name, that's great, but unless you know how to do those things, it's not really going to help you that much. You're not really going to get necessarily a bunch of people beating down your door saying, I see you have an MBA, why don't you come and work for us? It's not like that. You still have to have the personality and the social skills to be able to pursue opportunities and be able to take advantage of networking. Right? That never goes away, right? And this is not any kind of shield against that. That's what I think more people might need to understand, especially people like me who are introverts, who, they're maybe a bit sheltered from that world. As a reminder, this is a live chat, so get in the chat. Let me know if you guys have questions specifically. I'm just blabbing here. If you're wanting to know something specific, please let me know, and I will address your question. We already talked about the price, okay, and we talked about the price of online programs too, right? And surprisingly, the online programs, as I mentioned, can get quite pricey too, like up to $100,000 for a purely online MBA. You know, like that. To me, that's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. You know, for like knowledge that's essentially in the public domain already. You know what I mean? It's just absolutely crazy to me that people are charging that. But whatever. You know. Now I got some, just for the sheer hell of it, I went and looked up a couple of things just before this live stream. Some examples of well-known online programs and their costs. Here's in the United States. So University of North Carolina will charge you $125,000 for an MBA, you know, American dollars. Indiana University, the Kelley School of Business, $75,000. University of Florida, we're coming more downscale now. University of Florida. I know Florida gets a lot of flack. Must be the tornadoes going through there every couple of weeks. But Warrington College of Business will charge you $60,000 for an MBA. Right? There's Arizona State. I'm not sure how to say this, but the W.P. Carey School of Business, $60,000. And Carnegie Mellon, this is a more famous one. The Tepper School of Business, an online MBA from Carnegie Mellon is $140,000 US. Can you believe that? To me, that just blows me away. That blows me away. You know, I don't know if I'd recommend any of that. I honestly don't. I would, like, for that kind of money, I don't know. Unless you're like planning on working, you know, in the bright center of whatever industry you know you're in. Like you're trying to outcompete like hundreds of other people for job stuff. Unless that's your goal, you know, and that's what you're wanting to do. You know, I wouldn't necessarily recommend those. Especially when you're spending that kind of money and then you have to say it's an online MBA. You know what I mean? It's like, if the name carries a lot of prestige, does the fact that it's online still carry a lot of stigma? I would say yes. Things are slowly changing in that department, but I would say as of right now, the online thing, it still erodes the credibility or the status of that qualification. You know, especially we have to pay through the nose for it, but then it's still only an online MBA and the stigma that carries, you know? So, but that's just me. But the point is that there's many options for people that are into this kind of stuff. You have all those options on the high end. A lot of universities, they don't charge like over 100,000. You can still get it for like, you know, the equivalent of 50,000 US, somewhere in that, you know, for a couple of years, right? Full time. So that's kind of what you're looking at. And then you have a lot of stuff on the lower end, right? And once again, to sort of bring this up again, I have my version of it for $100,000, where basically what you're doing with me is you are simply getting a reading list and you're reading the same textbooks that they'd be using in those high-end programs, right? You can order them off Amazon, you know, like that's the thing. You can get the same book. So you're not in the class being read the book by the professor, right? Who's like some world-renowned authority on these things, right? If you're going to top Ivy League schools or something, but you got the same book. So you're reading the same material. So if you just want it for its intrinsic value, you know, which is what I would recommend for most people, you know what I mean? You're getting the same value, right? So how much does that cost? Well, it's the price of the book plus the price of the recommendation. It's really not that much, you know? So that's what my program is, for what it's worth, you know? And the great thing about mine is that I decided to come up with something. This was based on a real life need I saw with a lot of students and stuff I was teaching. And, you know, they wanted something that they wanted to understand it, but they didn't necessarily want to sign on for 2 years of like intense study, you know? They weren't necessarily interested in all areas of business, and they weren't necessarily interested in going like super in depth into all of them. They just wanted a working knowledge for various reasons, right? Either some people were entrepreneurs that just wanted to know, like, I want to learn marketing, or I want to learn, you know, accounting, or I want to learn this specific area. You know, well, here's a way of doing that, right? I basically point you in the direction, like, here's the book, here's some videos, here's my take on it, and then you don't have to read the book. You don't have to do all the assignments. You don't have to, do it really in depth if you don't want to. If you're just looking to skim it, you have that. So that's what I decided to offer. So at the very low end, you've got that. If you're considering doing like $100,000 MBA, I would say get something like my course or an equivalent of it, just to put your toe in the water, get a preview of what it's going to be, what the material is you're going to be learning, right? And to see if that really appeals to you, if there's any question of that, I would say do programs like this just to sort of see what you're getting into. Maybe even do a little bit in advance, give yourself an edge. That might be possible. Art Sim says, after one class of an MBA, I've lost motivation. Yeah, I had a similar thing with engineering. Art Sim says, I'm going to an online state school, but the employer is paying 80% of it. Okay. Well, that's a nice, sweet arrangement, right? If they're covering 80% of it. Listen, Art Sim, how can I put this? First of all, trust your gut. If this is just not for you, it's just not for you, and no one should talk you out of that. But what I will say is that regardless of how you feel about it, regardless of how I feel about it, or what my opinion is, a lot of other people out there regard this as something very, very valuable and very, very useful. That's the perception, right? So if you're given this opportunity where your employer is covering 80% of it, it may be worthwhile to stick with it and to try and, just to try and finish it. And so you can walk away with something useful. And if that's your goal, if that's what you're going to do, I don't know if you're like about to quit or something, like based on your comment there. But I would say, like, consider doing it. It might not be the most interesting thing ever sometimes. Like, for example, one area of the Master's of Business Administration degree that I wasn't super excited about doing was the accounting portion. It's what passes for the most technical kind of part of the program. And I was gloriously uninterested in accounting. It's just, I felt it was more like just a bean counter type thing. I really don't care. What I'm interested in is how to make money, how to, what you can do, to sort of like have something that just turns around and makes you tons of money. I was less interested about like exactly how to calculate every single mundane thing, So for me, that was kind of like, I hated accounting. It was just, it wasn't hard and it wasn't useless. It was just boring as F, And I forced myself to kind of push through that because I wasn't interested to get the result, get the degree, right? So I would say try and find some artificial motivation to push you through it because it's very useful. And the thing is, even if you get this thing and you're turned off it completely, like now, who's to say that in maybe 5 years, someone comes to you with an incredible opportunity and says, listen, you could have this like dream job, but it requires you to have an MBA, And if you just sort of bite your lip now and grin and bear it now, you'll be able to have that payoff in 5 years or whatever, and you'll be so glad that you did. Your future self will come back and thank your present self and say, like, I'm glad you persisted with that, So listen, each to their own, but that's what I would say, is a thing. You got to look beyond just what's right in front of your face and how you feel in this moment. I think that there's some real, there's a real payoff there. Art Sim says, the issue is I'm 43. 43? My God, you're old as the hills. 43, your life is over at 43. I'm not sure if it will help me. Listen, I'm being sarcastic, of course. Art Sim, you're awesome. 43 is nothing. Nothing. You know, I remember like I don't know about you, but when I was like 15, I thought that 20 was like old. You're past it. You're old. You're an adult. Everything's decided, And then of course you become 20 and then you think 25 is like, you're closer to 30 than you are 25. You play this mental game with yourself. I got news for you. Your career is probably going to go till you're past 60, maybe even 70, you know, in some way, shape, or form. Maybe you kind of don't do full-time stuff, but you still do some stuff, whatever. Life is long, you know, and you've got decades after 43, time for whole new careers to occur. You know what I'm saying? You know? Asher Green says, I'm 54. 54, by God, you're like a fresh-faced young whippersnapper, you know? You got your whole life ahead of you at 54. You know what I'm saying? It's like, you know, what's interesting to me is in the world of physics, right? People tend to win the Nobel Prize and that kind of stuff, you know, when they're in their 20s, right? They peak in their 20s, right? But then you look at other areas like philosophy. You know, when do people win the Nobel Prize in philosophy? They win it when they're like, you know, old as the hills. They win it when they're like in their 80s or something, you know? Like that's when they peak, you know? Everything in your life has been building up to like, you know, the work you do in your 80s, you know? That kind of really frames it. So listen, life is long and it evolves, it changes. So you might be doing this now, that's great. In 20 years, you might be doing this whole other thing. And a lot of people often do, you know? So, you know what I'm saying? So this stuff is still useful. Now, let me put it to you this way. One of the things that we talked about that people learn in an MBA is things like finance, okay? And finance is basically like the study of value and money, right? What you do with your money, like how investment works and, you know, all this kind of stuff, right? Now, what do old people do? Old people, a lot of old people, not all old people, but a lot of old people have money, right? Or they're managing money, the money they made over the course of their life, you know, whether they've accumulated like houses or whatever, you know, bank accounts, whatever, you know, they manage it, right? So when you're in your 70s or even when you're in your 80s, you might not be actively doing a ton of like, you know, things, like action-packed kind of things, but you're making financial decisions about what you've done with the stuff you've accumulated throughout your life, right? And that requires wisdom and knowledge and learning, right? And you're learning a bit of that in an MBA. So that knowledge will become very important to you when you're older. You want to make sure that you don't get swindled out of, you know, your fortune or what you've accumulated. You want to make sure that you've managed it intelligently so it grows by itself, things like that. That's a lot of the knowledge you will learn in an MBA, particularly in the finance area. Even the accounting area will help you there too, right? So useful stuff, you know, very useful stuff. So think of it that way. You're doing this now so that you have the tools to make sure that you don't get swindled out of your fortune later on, and that you've made smart financial decisions so that you have even more with it to use for yourself or to pass on to others, you know, whatever. Right? Think of it that way. It's learning is always good, and you can always refer back to this knowledge, especially if you keep your textbooks and stuff. You can always go back and refer to things. If they don't apply now, they may apply in the future. Alpipal says, good morning, Bill. Good morning, Alpipal. Leo Star 76. As someone with a hotel and restaurant management and been in the restaurant industry for 12 years, would you recommend an MBA or go for another type of master's degree as currently I'm barely sustaining? Absolutely. Like if you're in, first of all, if you're in a profession, right? Like you're in an industry like hotel and restaurant management, you know, understanding business is important on many different levels. First of all, if ever you wanted to start your own company, you know, it's a no-brainer. This is like how to make money. You're learning the scientific study of how to make money. That's pretty important. Okay. So if you're going to start your own company, obviously it's a no-brainer. Now, if you're not going to start your own company, but you're just sort of, you spend your life as a worker, working for other people, right? You want to manage your money. You want to ensure that you don't do things that are going to be detrimental to you. Like, you know, your fortune gets whittled away through mismanagement or by making bad financial decisions. That's what this teaches you too. It teaches you what to do with money. You know, basically that's like finance and stuff, right? So it's good on that level too. So whatever kind of level you're on, if you're just working as an employee your whole life, right? Or you're doing something a bit more interesting, you're sort of starting your own company and running it successfully, this will help you big time, right? Or you're doing something kind of in between, like, maybe you're working as an employee, but maybe there's some entrepreneurial opportunities. For example, you might see like, okay, as a hotel or whatever, or a restaurant, you employ various contractors to come in and do the cleaning or supply the food or, maintain the kitchen equipment or, real estate stuff, or, you see how those businesses, they have like a range of suppliers and contractors that do various things for them, right? Maybe you notice an entrepreneurial opportunity. You say, wait a minute, I see this contractor making all kinds of money, and I see a real need for having them do things a certain way, but they're not meeting that need. If I could have my way, I would have these people behave this way and offer this other thing. That would be really useful. I don't see anyone supplying that. I also look around and I see other restaurants or other hotels in the same situation, wishing that people would offer this thing. You know what? I'm going to start that. I'll start it on the side, just kind of put my toe in the water, see if anyone else is interested. And if it takes off, I'll put more of my effort into that. Now, the thing that helps you understand the mechanics of like how to get that off the ground, and, that's what you learn in business school, right? So that will help you if any opportunities like that come along, right? So whichever level you're at, it does provide value. Okay. Now, whether it makes sense to spend $250,000 learning this is another matter. You know what I'm saying? You've got that on one hand. You've got like a MBA from Harvard Business School or whatever, the top tier stuff on one end of the continuum. You have something like my course here at the extreme opposite end of the continuum, $100, plus, probably the same again for books off of Amazon, You know what I mean? Like, you've got some options here, but the knowledge is very, very useful. Asher Green says, I bought your MBA course. Okay. And the textbook you suggested is older, but the newer one are available in ebook form. It would be easier for me. So how difficult will be the course with the newer book? Well, I've never done the ebook, so I can't tell you with authority it would be like this. But that's if that's the way you would rather do it, then go for it. There's nothing wrong with that. Whichever, the way you do it, whatever works for you is fine, as long as it's the same. It's the same book. You know what I mean? I'm recommending a book based on the fact that I have read it and I know it has certain things in it. So if you're getting that book, whether it's like the Kindle version of it or the ebook version or some other version, or like the physical hard copy version, it really doesn't matter that much. It's whatever you want to do. The thing that I consider important, that I think is a good thing, is the ability to annotate it, right? So if you could get out a textbook and it's your textbook, you can write notes in the book, right? You can highlight things, you can underline things, you can circle things, you can write little notes in the margin, right? I think that's a key aspect to learning. It also helps you if you have to come back to the material at some other time, and because you're using it as a reference, right? So if you can do that with the ebook, then that would be, for me, that would be like perfect, right? But I know that some ebooks on some platforms, depending on what you're doing, they may not allow that. So that would be the only concern I would have in just automatically going for an ebook instead of like a physical textbook, is the ability to annotate. As long as you can do that, then I'd say you're getting the full experience without compromise. And hopefully the course worked for you. Thanks for buying it. Hopefully it was a good experience. Suhan on a Journey says, at college, I was from a humanities background. Can I study business management in a bachelor's abroad for higher education, or will economics be helpful for business? Well, it's not an and/or type situation. Economics is helpful for business because you do take economics as part of a an MBA, for example. Okay. I kind of mentioned this earlier in the stream. Okay. So I talked about it more earlier, but I was mentioning the fact that, you can take an economics degree and it goes far more in depth, right? In business, they teach you a more practical version of economics. It's more pared down, and it's discussed more like applied economics. Like, how can I use economic principles to calculate the optimum price for my product, or something like that, right? So you learn a bit of macroeconomics, a bit of microeconomics, but it's presented not as sort of like general theory. It's presented as like, how can you use this, right, in real world situations? Whether you come from humanities or anywhere else, it doesn't really matter. The way the MBA is structured, how you learn it, what you learn, and its value is the same, regardless of what area you might have studied before. I studied engineering. I had an engineering background, and I worked essentially in a technical background for years, and then took an MBA. Doesn't matter. Now, in terms of studying it abroad, I'm not an expert on like immigration and all that kind of stuff. So I can't speak to that element, but there are many people who can. I would encourage you to reach out to them and learn that stuff. One of the most useful things you can do for yourself is learn how to get informational interviews. So you can use tools like LinkedIn to find people out in the world that know things that you would like to know, right? For example, in your case, Suhan on a journey, in your case, someone who can help you is probably someone who has an MBA, who has studied abroad, and comes from an economic background or a humanities background, right? You'd probably love to sit down with them and get them to explain like the implications of all of that, and what their journey was like, and what their experiences are like, and what their advice might be, right? So there's a person out there in the world that knows exactly what you want to learn, and this describes that person. Well, you can learn using things like LinkedIn. You can find such a person or several people that all fit that description. Then you can reach out to them and say, listen, I would love to get your expert opinion on this. Could you spare me half an hour of your time? And some people won't respond. Some people say no, but some people say yes. And now you're talking to people that know the exact thing you would like to know, and they can tell you about it. They can answer those questions for you. So learning how to do an informational interview is one of the most valuable things you could ever learn, because it means that you can learn anything. No knowledge is hidden from you. You have access to everything. This is the vehicle over which you go to get that knowledge. You connect with the person, you learn how to have a conversation, and you ask them directly. What advice would you have for someone in that situation, and why do you say what you say? So I would encourage you to learn that too. That'll open up doors. Alpipal says, when I was an employee, I was given the impression for most of the time that it costs money and time to train me or keep me employed, like I'm dragging them down and wasting their time if they don't keep up. Okay, yeah. So I'm wondering, does it really take a PhD in philosophy, in psychology, to figure your own life out? No, it doesn't. When being trained, they expect you to grasp it very quickly. Showed only once. Oh, like they only show it to you once. Fair, but very hard. Your thoughts? Okay, let's talk to the first part of this. Why do they have that attitude? They have that attitude because they're not interested in you and your career, per se. They're interested in you in as much as you are an employee, right? And once again, they're not interested in your potential to be promoted as an employee. They're interested in what you're doing for them now, okay? So if you're in a job now, presumably you are qualified to do that job, or else they wouldn't have given it to you, right? They are generally less excited about training you unless you need to be trained to do your actual job. You know what I'm saying? But training you for some hypothetical future role that you'll step into, they're really not interested in that. Because what does that encourage you to do? It encourages you to leave what you're doing now and go somewhere else. You could go somewhere else at their organization, or you could go somewhere else outside of their organization they don't care about, they have no incentive of to care for you and your future career. They only care about you in as much as you're an employee now. And they're not going to encourage you to like leave your current role and go to pastures greener. You know what I mean? So that's kind of the dilemma for a lot of employees, right? Employers. They're really not that interested in training you to the point where you figure like, this job is beneath me. I could do a lot better now, so I'm going to leave. It encourages you to leave them in the lurch, So yeah, their incentives are not aligned with yours. You care about your future career. They don't. They only care about you in as much as you serve them, right? In a very concrete way, not some abstract possible future way, but right now. So a lot of employers are actually, they actually discourage making their employees more valuable because they don't want their employees to demand more money and leave to go on to better things. They want them where they are, pulling their weight, being satisfied with the amount of money they're being paid now. That's what the employer's incentive usually is, right? Okay, so that's where your incentives diverge from, your employer. Now, the second part, where was that? The second part, do you need to have a PhD in psychology to figure your own life out? No, and no one, and people don't. What I find a frustrating thing about being alive is that, you usually get full and complete information later on about something, in your youth. And of course, the moment has passed, right? You had the opportunity and, maybe you didn't avail yourself of an opportunity because you didn't realize you had that opportunity. You didn't recognize its value for what it was. Instead, you kind of squandered it maybe. And then you learn later in life, like, I should have done that because that was actually a very useful thing, right? Everyone experiences that to a degree. Life is not perfect. You sort of, if you're sort of waiting on the sidelines, waiting for that moment when everything is going to be perfect before you act, you're going to be waiting a long time. I wouldn't be surprised if you never jumped into the game and acted, everything is imperfect. You just sort of try to do as good a job as you can, and no one has full and complete knowledge of everything and no one can see the future. You know what I mean? So you combine all that stuff and it's like some song from the 90s, your choices are half chance, which is absolutely true. But learning is always good. Learning is a good thing, especially learning about something like this, which is, how to make money. You could argue that if you're going to learn something in life, that would be one of the more useful things. We all need money to a degree, right? It's not the be all end all, but it's certainly important. That's why we're talking about taking an MBA, which is the study of business, which is about how to make money. Right? You don't need a PhD to figure out your life. But what I would say is that learning is good. The more learning you have, generally speaking, the better. You're welcome, Suhan. Tong says, don't know if this is a Q&A, but a company did a screening interview with me and then invited me to do a presentation about a project they provided. I spent a lot of time, weeks, and did what I felt was a great presentation. They said they would be back to me in a day, but it's been nearly a week now. Should I ask for feedback or assume this is a rejection? Yeah, we're not talking about getting a job here. We're talking about the title, which is, taking an MBA in 2025. I'll be back later this afternoon, actually, in an hour with a collaborative live stream with another YouTuber where we answer Q&A questions. And you get my perspective and you get her perspective, Abby, from the YouTube channel Life Work Balance. She's a professional recruiter, so you get slightly different perspectives answering your question. Don't wait for people to follow up. If you want to follow up, just follow up. And if it's not worth your time, it's not worth your time. Just keep moving forward. Stop waiting by the phone, hoping somebody will respond, and then wondering what can they be thinking? Look, you have no control over them. It is no commentary on you. It's simply did do they happen to be looking for what you happen to have or not? That's the only real question. And if they are looking for it, they'll call you. They'll contact you in some way. If you don't have them contacting you, then the answer is no. It's just that simple. And it's okay. It's not a reflection on you. You just move on to the next opportunity. Kin Y says, I'm doing an MBA this year from Tier 3 college. What should I have to do? What's a Tier 3 college? I'm not sure. What country are you in? And I'm totally cluel. Is that cruel or clueless? Or a delightful combination of both? It would be cool to be cruel and clueless at the same time. I think a lot of cruel people are clueless. What should I have to do? Well, you could always take my course and get a total preview of the entire thing. But hopefully, hopefully you should know what you're doing. An MBA is a study of business, and what they do is they teach you about an average of 12 different courses. Some of them are like universal, others are kind of elective, so you can specialize in different things based on what you're interested in, right? Some of the core components are things like accounting, finance, marketing, HR, economics, operations, things like this. Those are probably the core. I'm probably forgetting a couple in there. And then electives are things like, entrepreneurship, IT, and IT systems, things like that. Innovative problem solving. You can go into all different areas of finance. That's what I did. I took an MBA specializing in finance. So you can go into international finance. You can go into, venture capital. You can go into all the different sort of different areas. You can go deeper into any core area, and there's so many different areas. You could easily look that up on Wikipedia or ChatGPT or Google, and get the idea. So that's what it is. But the idea behind it is that, you see, you don't really understand business unless you look at the same problem or situation through several different lenses, right? For example, accounting is one way of looking at things, right? Everything is a cost, right? And it's only tangible stuff that you're concerned about, right? On the other hand, marketing is another lens that's almost like the polar opposite of accounting. You don't care about cost, right? You care about customers and customer satisfaction. You care about opportunities, right? Entrepreneurship is another way of looking at things. You're not looking at what the business does. You're looking at maybe opportunities that it's ignoring. Saying, yeah, it's great that you're selling to this customer, but you're missing out on a huge opportunity. You could add this little thing on to what you're doing and sell them that too. That hasn't even entered your tiny little minds. Hello, right? You know what I mean? Accountants don't give a crap about customers or customer satisfaction. In fact, they view customer satisfaction as something kind of silly. If you cut your costs and delivered a slightly less quality service, you could still maintain the same money coming in the door with, but you spend less trying to get that money. So it's more efficient, right? So they pull you in different ways of looking at things, right? And the idea is that if you're only looking at business through one or two of these lenses, you're not understanding what's really going on. So they teach you this sort of global perspective. Let's look at a business problem from a variety of different perspectives, and only then can you kind of start to understand what's involved here. That's the idea. Okay, Tong says, okay, thanks, Bill, for that, and sorry for it's not a disruption. Tong, you're awesome. Don't worry about it. But what I'm saying is, come back, if you can, come back in an hour, and, we can get into your question in much greater detail, and you'll get a couple of different perspectives about it from two different people. Alpipal says, yeah, that makes sense. It just feels and it is the reality that it's based on competition, not just as a seller finding customers, but people willing to pay the price, so it feels depressing. Okay, now, Alpipal. Now, this was... Oh yeah, the psychology. Okay. Um, okay, so just bear with me a second here, Alpi Pal. Um, so talking about training as an employer from the employer's perspective, and then figuring out your life. There. I didn't address the whole they expect you to learn it like that. Listen, sometimes that's a realistic expectation. Sometimes it isn't. Depends what you're learning. Some things are pretty straightforward, right? If you're awake and you're semi-interested, you pay attention, you understand. It's really not that hard. Other things are quite complex, and you really need to absorb it first, and that means going over and over and over it several times. Maybe understanding a little piece of it more each time, right? So expectations aren't like universal. I mean, and you can't generalize them, right? It really depends on what you're doing and who you are and how it's presented, by the way. I think we all know that. There are some pretty horrible teachers out there. That's definitely a factor. And like most people, I had my share of terrible teachers. I've also had the experience of going back to academia and being a teacher. So, that's interesting. That's where, you really have to put your money where your mouth is. It's very easy to criticize others. When you have to go back and do what they do, that's the real test. Sometimes it's not as easy as it seems from the outside. But don't be depressed. You know what? Alpi Pal, you're awesome. You're doing fine. It's like employers are not really interested in you. They're just not. They're not like this parental kind of, entity that takes care of you and wants to set you up for the future. Arguably, they may have been that in the past more often than not. And I know that in places like Japan today, that's more of a thing than what it is in the rest of the world, where you're expected to be loyal to the company to a degree. You don't just jump ship the moment you don't like something. But in return, they take care of you. They won't lay you off on a whim. They'll give you a pension. They'll try and they want to employ you for your entire career. They don't want to just discard you. It's much more of a symbiotic relationship where you care for each other. Doesn't always work out, but that's what they're at least trying to go for in some places. But in most situations, that's just not how it works. It's a simple financial exchange. I give you my time, you give me some cash. We'll call it a day. I have no loyalty to you, and you have no loyalty to me. Beyond our current arrangement right now. So that can help clarify things if you're trying to make career decisions about should you stay here or should you go there or should you believe a promise? That's a big one. When people say okay, come and work here. And if you jump through all these hoops and you put in your time, then, then there'll be more opportunities for you here, right? Have you ever heard that? Now, some companies, they deliver on that. They say, okay, well, now that we've vetted you and we've put you through the ringer and you've passed the test, now we're going to consider you for management roles or, or whatever, right? Other places, you believe their promises, you put in all this extra work and things and you invest in it, and then they just discard you, and they don't care about you at all. And it really shows, they don't keep their promises. It was all just a con to get you to do things for them, right? They never had any intention of fulfilling any of those promises from the get-go. We see all kinds, so it's hard to tell. But the more informed you are and the more knowledgeable you are, not just about the theory of business, but about things in general, right? The better the quality of your decisions overall. Okay, where was I here? Alpi Pal, yeah, that makes sense. It just feels like, and it's the reality that it's based on competition, not just the seller finding customers, but people willing to pay the price. So it feels depressing. Well, look at it this way. Every industry has its quirks, and every industry, it looks so simple from the outside in. The reality is that a lot of industries are actually quite complicated, and it seems straightforward when, you're not a player in the industry, you're just an employee or something. And you see customers doing this and you go, oh yeah, it's like, but then other things don't make sense to you. You think to yourself, like, that's stupid. Why are companies doing this? Why doesn't someone simply come along and do this? You would clean up, right? Now, that's where, at least to me, the real interesting part is, because if you then go and probe that, you say, okay, I'm going to set up a company that's going to provide this, right? Let's put our money where our mouth is and see if that really works out. According to your theory, you're going to clean up because this is a no-brainer, right? Now, sometimes that works out, but sometimes it doesn't, because there was some other factor of which you were ignorant that prevents that from happening. Maybe it turns out that, like, oh, no one trusts you because you're an unknown, and your name or your reputation is paramount in this industry. No one is willing to try an unknown new player, and that explains a lot. You know what I mean? Once you realize that, you're like, oh, okay, now it makes sense. So you know what I'm saying? But it's not look, if it's depressing to you, it's depressing to you. Who am I to say that that's wrong? But what I think is kind of cool about it is that, people feel that they're getting something. They want something or they need something. They're prepared to pay for it. It shows that it's something that they need at the end of the day. They're not buying it, because they don't need it or they don't want it. They do want it. They're showing it by buying it, Alpipel says, in other words, you have to just be as competitive as corporations compete to get customers and employees. Motor skills. Easy to criticize others, but you still have to go through the same steps at some point. Boom, spot on. Yeah. Well, listen. One of the basic things you learn in business is, this is like the absolute basics of strategy, of competitive strategy. And maybe you already know this. One possible, for example, how can you compete? Well, one obvious thing is competing on price, right? So what you do is you become more efficient than other people. Usually this involves economies of scale. You do something with high volume, like Walmart, right? The reason they can get their prices low is because they do a lot of things in bulk, right? So you have that volume discount, right? So we're not talking about lowering prices. We're talking about lowering costs. You can make the thing for less. Therefore, if you wanted to, you could lower your prices more than your competitors, right? You don't have to. You could keep your prices exactly the same and sell just as much as your competitors. The only difference is that you're making greater profits on each unit sold than your competitors, right? Because you have lower costs, right? So you grow at the same rate, it's just that you are more profitable. You have a higher profit margin, right? But that's competing on cost, cost competitiveness. There's another strategy called the focus strategy, and this is where things get exciting. It's where you don't compete because you're bigger than anyone else. You don't compete because you have more money or anything. You compete because you're focusing more on a certain type of customer. The problem with Walmart is Walmart tries to be everything to everyone. It's not really focusing on any one customer and saying, look, I'm going to be the best supplier to you. That's why Walmart may sell bicycles, but someone could still open a pro bicycle shop where their bicycles are way more expensive than the bicycles you get at Walmart, but they're also way better. And people will still choose to buy a bike from this custom shop that's operated by one person rather than go to Walmart. So in a sense, you beat out the global multinational. Customers would rather come to you than to the global multinational, right? Even though they're more efficient and they've got all kinds of things going for them, they'll still pass them over to get to you because you are specifically paying attention to this one type of customer that cares about bicycles. They want bicycles done right. you know? So they are not happy with Walmart. If you just want a basic bike for your kids or something, you go there. But no, I'm someone who takes biking seriously. I want something more. So I go to the mom and pop shop that's got a teeny tiny little operation, right? I choose them over Walmart. And it looks like that's not going to change in the near future, right? So that's the focus strategy, right? You know, Walmart's trying to do all these things. It can't go in every direction at once. It's doing something very well, but you can still go head to head with them and win if you know what you're doing, right? Now, this is like an absolute basic concept. There's a lot more complex things that are like equally cool, at least to me. You know, so it's not all depressing. There's actually a ton of opportunity out there. You know, if you know these ways of thinking, and then you back it up with being very practical, and you get actual information on the specifics of the thing that you're interested in, and you can, and sometimes you can get these ideas off the ground, right? That's, for example, that's like entrepreneurship. That's one of the ways of looking at business, right? Kid and Wise says, what kind of skills I have to learn before an MBA? You don't have to learn much. You need to probably have high school, like a grade 12 equivalent. You need to, I think a lot of like universities and things that have an MBA program, they will require you to have a bachelor degree of some kind. And that's where business is quite different from like a lot of other areas. For example, if you wanted to get a master's degree in engineering, you would need a bachelor degree in engineering, right? Because it builds on top. But a weird thing about business and the MBA degree is that a lot of times they don't need you to have a bachelor of business. They just need you to have a bachelor of something, right? You could have a bachelor of nursing, and then you could take an MBA. You could have a bachelor of, you know, animal husbandry and then take an MBA. You could have a bachelor in science or in English literature and then take an MBA, right? You know, so you just need to be able to read and understand the scholastic process, you know, and there you go. Now, for what it's worth, my version of that here on the extreme low end for like $100, it's unaccredited, but it's meant to be for its intrinsic value. So you're not doing it to get a piece of paper that impresses people. You're doing it to get the knowledge, right? And you know, there's a lot of people out there that could use the knowledge, but you know, they're not willing to pay $50,000 plus, take 2 years off their life, and then go back to school. You know what I'm saying? It's not really what they're looking for. They just want the knowledge now. You know, and that's why I created my course. So people like that who are wanting to be entrepreneurs, who are employees already, and you know, they don't want to undo any of that. They just want to tack something onto it. Well, you can. Now, why am I mentioning this? I'm mentioning this because someone asked about prerequisites. You don't have any prerequisites to learn this. I mean, as long as you can read and write, and I would say as long as you have like grade 12 high school, you should be able to do this and get something out of it that's valuable. So it runs the whole spectrum here. Alpi Pal says, perfect example. Safeway, Albertsons decided to cut costs on smoked Gouda. Do you smoke cheese? I didn't think that was possible. I thought the cheese would melt and catch fire, and you know, I guess the Swiss, they do fondue, right? That's like a melted cheese, right? That you drink or something. I don't know. And then you yodel. You put on your best lederhosen and you yodel from the tops of the nearby mountains. That's what being Swiss is all about, and making cuckoo clocks in the process. Okay, so they cut costs on smoked Gouda cheese by making them square instead of round, and it tastes the opposite of how good it was. Yeah, well, you see, once again, they're experimenting right now. If customers presumably find that makes sense to them, right? Presumably if they're, one would hope that if they're releasing a product that's of less quality, they also have an accompanying lowering of the price, right? So that it presumably sells in similar quantities. Now, if customers feel that they're getting something for it, they don't mind the shape and the quality, as long as it's cheaper, great. If they are not coming with you on that, you know what I mean? It might seem like customers have to come along with that, and customers ultimately decide if that thing is accepted, right? It may not feel like that, but that's actually what's going on. Kid and Y says, my domain is MBA in finance. Yeah, you and me both, right? I think, where is it? I think that's my MBA right there. It was one of the areas that I knew the least about beforehand. That's why I took it. And, being in some of the roles that I was in before really convinced me that, like, you need to brush up on that area. That area is very important, and I had a bit of not an inferiority complex, but it was shown to me that, like, I didn't really have the chops when it came to finance. So that was like an incentive for me to get an MBA specializing in finance. I'm glad I did. I think finance is a kind of a fascinating area. Is it the be all end all? No, it isn't. But when you combine it with like actual practical skills and knowledge in other areas, it can be pretty fierce. Kid and Wise says, which course? LP Powell says, you are good enough and worthy to just jump right in. You'll learn something regardless of your skills as long as you show up. As they say, 90% of just showing up. Yeah, that's true. That's why networking is a thing, right? Just show up. Just like meet the people that are the gatekeepers for things and ask, are you looking for somebody? I'd love to work with you on this, things like that. Magic words for a lot of people, You don't get the job because you were better, hands down, than anyone else. You got the job because you're the one that showed up. Asher Green says, never buy a musical instrument from Walmart, even if you are buying one for your kids. I don't think that just applies to musical instruments. I think it applies to a lot of products, right? If anyone has ever bought a tent from Walmart, you may know what I'm talking about. The kind that you throw down, it just pops up, right? That's the sign of a good quality tent, right? And professional too. So there you go. So I think, I don't know, it feels like we've covered it all. If anyone has any last minute questions, please let me know in the chat. We've got some great stuff in the chat. Thank you for asking such intelligent questions for you guys today. And for the 27 people here who are watching this right now, thank you for being here. Hopefully you got something useful. I'm going to resume this live stream every week. So every Monday at the same time, we're going to be doing side hustle ideas. We're going to be talking more about side hustles and entrepreneurship and that kind of stuff. That's the purpose. I think it's an incredibly awesome area of business. I encourage people to think like entrepreneurs and like open your eyes. And if you have the skills, that really helps you. That can really help you for a start doing a side hustle, which is a magical thing because it's like a way of putting your toes in the water of business and being an entrepreneur without much risk. You're not quitting your day job. You're still working at your day job. You're just doing this on the side. And it's a great way to develop those kind of skills and to try things. And if you hit on something rolling in and you're maybe even rivaling your day job income, and it's at that point you decide, okay, I'm going to take the plunge and I'm going to do this full time and I'm going to quit my day job. That's a much more intelligent way of doing it than what I've seen a lot of people do, which is they quit their job and they just have an idea, a vague idea of what they want to do. And then they start from scratch and the pressure's on because they have no income at that point, right? So very, very risky, So we're going to be talking about that in the coming weeks. So come back next week, same time, and we will talk about it more. In the meantime, check out that course. If you are interested in business, you just want to put your toe in the water and learn what you study in business, or you want to take the course for its intrinsic value, and teach you some of these skills. Check it out. There's a link in the description. I made videos that describe all my courses. So you know exactly what you're getting into, exactly how it works, what you get, what the deal is. So check out those if you are interested. Link in the description. I will be back in half an hour talking about job search. And later this week, on Friday, I've added a new live stream where we just talk about business. And I've attempted to do this in the past. What I would like to do is just talk about general business concepts, about how to manage people or operations or money or, you know, business units, things like this, just real life situations, and share some of my knowledge. I like talking about that stuff. Don't really have much of an opportunity on this YouTube channel, but I'm making an attempt again. So come back on Friday and we can talk about that stuff. Okay, do we have any last minute questions here? Never buy me. Okay, will you do a Draw My Life sometime? I'm not sure what that is. Is that like a game show or something? You know, some old guy with fantastic looking gray hair runs it with like cards and stuff, and then some lady comes out in a sparkling sequin gown and, like, you know, does like the pointing thing, right? I'm not sure. Where you tell your life story and maybe use a whiteboard to illustrate the montage. I wasn't planning on it. This isn't really about me. It's about you guys. It's about what you're wanting to learn and what you're wanting to do and what would be useful for you. But that's an interesting idea. I never thought about that. Guido says, I didn't get the notification for the stream. Your side hustle streams are my favorite. Looking forward to next week. Well, that's very nice to hear, Guido. That's high praise indeed. You can always rewatch them. I mean, they're available. So even if I'm not live, you can still go back and watch the stream for what that's worth. You might not be able to ask questions or anything, but you can still see it. So hopefully that's somewhat of a help. Guy Incognito says, maybe do some YouTube challenges, entertain us. I could do a dance, right? I could jump through hoops. That would be pretty good, right? Card tricks, right? I could make rabbits disappear. These are all useful skills that life teaches you, you know? So absolutely. That's a great suggestion, Guy Incognito. If you have any more specifics you'd like to share, what you like to see, I'll be happy to investigate. Put it that way. Okay, thanks everyone. You guys are awesome. I will see you soon, and I will see you next week, same time, for another edition of Side Hustle Ideas. Take care of yourselves.